November 4th, 1970, Los Angeles. A little girl was discovered after her mother went to apply for benefits. A social worker who had briefly seen 13-year-old Genie Wiley said that she was malnourished, dirty, and clearly really in a bad way. Social workers who were shocked at the state of her immediately took her into the custody of the state. In the very beginning of the investigation, it was discovered that the little girl, Genie, had actually spent the majority of her brief 13 years naked and chained to an overflowing potty chair in a dark corner of a bedroom. Genie was only 56 pounds when examined by doctors, severely underdeveloped. She looked about 6 or 7 years old, compared to the 13 years old that she really was, so you can imagine. She must have spent so much time in that super small room, she couldn't even stand up straight. She had a hunched over sort of walk. It was described as a bunny hop. She had difficulty swallowing and chewing. She wasn't able to be controlled and often acted like a wild animal. She also couldn't speak. She was completely mute. After speaking with her, she didn't seem to understand anything outside of a couple of words. One of those words being her name and the other being the word sorry. Both of her parents were charged for this, of course, but her father killed himself the day before he was supposed to be in court. He left 2 notes, one to his son that told him to be good and that he loved him. The other was for everyone, and it said something on the lines of, "The world will never understand." Genie's father believed that she had something wrong with her since she didn't walk at an early age. After examinations, it was determined that wasn't the case. She was a little bit underweight and had been ill, but she didn't appear to have anything that would have prevented her to develop this way. Which meant that all of this, her delays, her lack of being able to communicate, her movement, was all due to the neglect and deprivation she had suffered. Genie was one of 2 children to survive in that family, out of 4. Her mother had a head injury, which left eye issues, along with cataracts. Beatings from Genie's father only made that worse. Genie's father had never wanted children. He thought that they were messy and gross. But 5 years into the relationship, there was a pregnancy that resulted in a daughter. Genie's father hated the sounds of her cries. He grabbed her and threw her into the garage where it was freezing. The baby caught pneumonia and died. She was only 10 weeks old. Their second child was born with an autoimmune disease called hemolytic disease and died at the age of 2. The third child, who was also born with the autoimmune disease, was a boy. Genie's father forced the mother to keep the boy quiet. This caused Genie's brother to develop language issues. When he was 4, his grandparents took him out of concern. While out of the house, he developed quite a bit. However, he was returned soon after that. According to the neighborhood, the son was the only child the family had. The news of her discovery went very public, and because of that, the National Institute of Mental Health funded research to discover whether it was possible for her to mentally develop after such deprivation. Researchers would never deliberately conduct deprivation experiments with other people on moral grounds. Which I do have to confess, Genie wasn't the child's real name, but the name given to the case in order to protect her privacy. The ultimate goal was to rehabilitate and study Genie's progress. She learned basic social skills like potty training and dressing herself. She loved to just absorb her surroundings and just look at everything very intently. She was even more wide-eyed when she was outside. She could communicate. Doctors noticed that she was very good at telling people what she wanted or needed non-verbally, but speaking the language was a struggle for her. It was then determined that the focus of the research should probably switch to Genie learning language. At the time the genie was found, there happened to be a discussion going on in the linguistics community. Linguist Noam Chomsky from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology said that humans were born with the ability to create language. He believed that language wasn't something that people picked up, it was something that they created, and it was part of our genetics. Neuropsychologist Eric Lunenburg added, humans are born with the ability to develop language, but says that if their language isn't acquired by puberty, then there's a chance that they wouldn't learn it at all. Very soon after, and very quickly, Genie began to speak. Only single words at first, then gradually 2 word strings, then 3. Despite her ability to learn language, she wasn't able to ask questions and didn't understand grammar. Typically in childhood development, after beginning to speak in 2 word phrases, children will experience a language explosion a few weeks later, in which speech will develop very quickly. In Genie's case, she never had a kind of explosion. Her speech kind of plateaued and stopped after creating 2 or 3 word strings. And this was despite 4 or 5 years of additional work with her. What Genie showed the scientists was that it was possible for somebody to learn some language after a critical period. But her ability to learn grammar and to understand it is what really hindered her into speaking the language. And when all of this was happening, she was moved into a foster home with one of her teachers, Jean Butler. Jean claimed that the scientists were putting Genie under extreme stress with her tests and wanted to file for primary custody. She was soon denied that application. Genie's mother had been acquitted on all of the abuse charges. They couldn't determine she had any involvement. She was a passive woman who was almost completely blind. She said she wasn't physically able to protect her children from their father, who was the abuser. Genie's mother continued to visit her this time, even receiving corrective eye surgery so she could regain some of her vision. Genie moved to another foster home and was there for about 4 years, the home of a psychologist and his wife. There she thrived, and she was allowed to be researched and tested through the stay. Her mother still continued to meet with her once a week and grow their relationship. Over time, the institute lost funding and Genie was given to her mother. But her mother found that taking care of her was harder than she thought, and with no support, she returned Genie to the care of the state. Any progress that was made on Genie and her developments had been completely reverted. Genie's mother sued the state and the hospital for testing on her daughter while she was in her vulnerable state. They did eventually end up settling out of court. One of the psychologists that worked with her visited her on a couple of her birthdays, her 27th and her 29th. He mentioned that she looked overall depressed and institutionalized. Currently, her whereabouts are unknown, if she's alive or dead. She's presumed to be the ward of the state of California, living in an adult care home. As of 2022, Genie would have been 65 years old.